Then, starting home, he walked toward the trees and under them, leaving behind him the big sky, the whisper of wind voices in the wind-bent wheat. The end.
It was a far-out idea, irresistible, an obsession. The success of his latest novel, In Cold Blood, was just an excuse for the huge party which would be his crowning glory, the symbol of his triumph. It would make him the most celebrated writer in America. It was to be a masked ball which would unite the members of the glitterati he considered worthy of an invitation, and he would dazzle them. On the night of November 28, 1966, over 500 carefully chosen guests gathered in the sumptuous ballroom of the New York Plaza for Truman Capote's Black and White Ball. The event was everything he had hoped for. People were desperate to be included on the guest list. They came from all over America. Some even made the trip from Europe. Once again, Capote made the front pages. Sociologists are still asking if this was the most important night of the century, ran the ironic observation in the New York Times. What are the remnants of this magnificent soiree? Some grainy footage and a few black and white photos are the only testament to a triumph, albeit an ambiguous one. For here was a writer who was as media-friendly as he was vitriolic, a man still haunted by his New Orleans boyhood, for whom even his name was a challenge, Truman Streckfus Persons. Lily Mae Falk was just 17 with a good figure and dreams of escape when she met Arch Parsons in a redneck town in Alabama. Arch, who was 9 years her elder, had the gift of the gab, a big car, and even bigger plans for the future. The wedding went wonderfully, but was spoiled by married life which followed, and the relationship was already falling apart when, on September 30th, 1924, little Truman was born. His father was a worthless salesman selling worthless goods, forever worn out by life on the road. His mother needed more and attempted to realize her dreams with a series of fly-by-night lovers. Their lifestyle didn't leave much room for a child, and before long they were leaving him with one babysitter or another, or locking him up alone for the night in yet another hotel which they used as temporary accommodations, letting his cries go unanswered.
Eventually, I would become so exhausted that I would just throw myself on the bed or on the floor until they came back. Every day was a nightmare because I was afraid they would leave me when it turned dark. I had an intense fear of being abandoned, and I remember practically all of my childhood as being lived in a state of constant tension and fear.
In the summer of 1930, his parents finally abandoned him for good, leaving him with relatives of Lily Mae's. This part of the Falk clan was made up of 3 warring old spinsters and their asthmatic, hermit-like older brother. They were helped by 2 aging black servants. This strange but organized household was located in Monroeville, a little town in Alabama lost among the fields of corn and cotton. Up at dawn, bed at sundown, Mass every day. In his later works, Capote would capture the monotony of this rigid existence, the cold and niggardly old maids, the suffocating atmosphere of the house set to the rhythm of work and non-stop bickering. Only the eldest of the three sisters, the shy and naive Souk, was able to bring him a little comfort by allowing him to stay with her in the kitchen or to accompany her on one of her rare outings to gather the plants she needed to make her remedies. The only entertainment came in the evenings when the family, friends, and neighbors would gather out on the porch of the old Baroque house on Alabama Avenue. There, the young Truman took in the strange and sometimes troubling stories involving deaths and ghosts which were inspired by local legend and gossip. From time to time, his mother would turn up unannounced with all the latest trimmings of some far-off, fascinating town, only to disappear again, as if by magic, in a cloud of red dust swept up by her departing car.
I stood in the road watching her drive away in a black Buick which got smaller and smaller and smaller. Imagine a dog watching and waiting and hoping to be taken away. That's the picture of me then.
One day, his mother suddenly arrived in Monroeville to take him off to New York, where she had recently married. He thought his dream had come true, but he was soon to encounter another form of solitude and distress. His adoptive father was Joe Capote, and bearing his name, Truman went off to boarding school, where he sometimes went months without a visit or an outing. This new abandonment came as a hard shock. He started sleepwalking and having hysterical fits. His size and gentle mannerisms quickly became the butt of the other boys' spiteful jokes. Truman was, however, able to become one of the most well-known boys in the school. Whether people actually liked him or not, nobody could ignore his incredible energy and his talent for storytelling. Despite his small frame and high-pitched voice, he made use of his sharp, sarcastic mind to deflect the insults and gain the confidence to stand up for who he was. He openly declared his homosexuality and proclaimed his double ambition to become a great writer and to mingle with the rich and famous.
I started to write when I was 8 years old, so seriously that I dared never mention it to anybody. I spent hours every day writing and never showed it to a teacher. I used to come home from school and other kids did whatever they did, but I would write for 3 or 4 hours every day, just like some kids would practice the piano. It was an obsession.
By his 18th birthday, he had recognized that writing was clearly his vocation, and throwing caution to the wind, he took the first step on the road to realizing his dream. Taking advantage of job vacancies due to the war, he dropped his studies and went to work at the New Yorker. It was just a position in the archives room, cutting out cartoons and articles. But the 2 years he spent there gave him some experience and the confidence he needed to approach the magazines which would eventually take him on as a columnist. And so it was in the spring of 1945, Truman Capote entered the foyer of a fashion magazine known for its recognition of literary talent, Mademoiselle, which published his first short story, Miriam. After reading Miriam, the editor of Harper's Bazaar wasted no time in contacting Capote and promptly published another tale, A Tree of Night. A Tree of Night was set on a crowded night train. A young female student has to travel in the same compartment as a very strange couple who instill irrational fear in her.
Kay knew of what she was afraid. It was a memory, a childish memory of terrors that once, long ago, had hovered above her like haunted limbs on a tree of night. Aunts, cooks, strangers, each eager to spin a tale or teach a rhyme of spooks and death, omens, spirits, demons.
Success was instant and sparked off a battle between Harper's and Mademoiselle for the right to publish his work. His original style and unreal universe, his often troubling and ambiguous characters, created a demand beyond even his wildest dreams. In only a few months, Capote became the darling of the fashion magazines, in particular of the women who ran them. At only 21 years old, this flamboyant, childlike man had put his devastating charm to work. He had not yet published a novel, and here he was already making the people pages of the magazines. A full-page photo of him appeared in Life magazine, where he was described as esoteric New Orleans-born Truman Capote. As if by magic, doors were opening up in all directions for the kid from the South. He began receiving invitations to dinners where he would woo an even more important audience.
New York is like a city made out of modeling clay. You can make it whatever you want. It's the only city in the world in which you can have totally separate lives, groups of friends that don't know one another or anything about one another.
His network of contacts mushroomed when Capote's first real lover, Newton Arvin, who was later to become the biographer of Melville, introduced him to the literary establishment and to the works of Marcel Proust, Henry James, and other great writers of the 19th century. He met Carson McCullers, who, like him, was a prodigy of American writing, and who, also like him, was from the South. Even though they would fall out in later life, at first they were close friends. It was on her recommendation that Capote introduced himself to one of the directors of the publisher's Random House. Again, Capote was quick to make a strong impression. William Goyen described him as a naughty kind of boy, but full of talent. It was Random House who in 1948 would publish Truman Capote's first novel. His first novel was supposed to be called Summer Crossing, and Capote decided to set it in New York. After all, he had made his new life there and had taken the city by storm. So when he experienced writer's block, it came as something of a surprise that he should return to Monroeville to collect his thoughts and continue his work.
The household rose at 4:30, breakfasted by electric light, and was off about its business as the sun ascended, leaving me alone and increasingly in a panic. For more and more, Summer Crossing seemed to me thin, clever, unfelt. Another language, a secret spiritual geography was burgeoning inside me, taking hold of my night dream hours as well as my wakeful daydreams.
And so it was, while strolling next to the pond where he had learned to swim, his childhood anxieties suddenly re-emerged, and like a revelation, he had his novel. Excitement,
A variety of creative coma overcame me. Walking home, I lost my way and moved in circles round the woods, for my mind was reeling with the whole book. It was dark when I got home and cold, but I didn't feel the cold because of the fire inside me. I said good night, locked myself in my room, tossed the manuscript of Summer Crossing into a bottom bureau drawer, collected several sharp pencils and a fresh pad of yellow lined paper, got into bed fully clothed, and with pathetic optimism wrote Other Voices, Other Rooms, a novel by Truman Capote.
According to Capote, the novel was an attempt to exorcise demons, but in fact, he transformed these demons into works of art. A 12-year-old boy, Joel Knox, sets off for New Orleans in search of his father. He doesn't know him. He doesn't even have the same name. Joel encounters a series of strange characters, most of them haunted by their past or caught up in their dreams. He finally comes to the crumbling old house where his father lives, but the family in the house are reluctant to let Joel meet him, and it soon becomes clear why. He is a cripple who can only communicate by throwing red tennis balls down the stairs. Unable to bear it, the boy runs away in the hope of one day finding his true self.
His mind was absolutely clear. He was like a camera waiting for its subject to enter focus. The wall yellowed in the meticulous setting of the October sun, and the windows were rippling mirrors of cold, sensual color. Beyond one, someone was watching him. All of him was dumb except his eyes. They knew, and it was Randolph's window. Gradually, the blinding sunset drained from the glass, darkened, and it was as if snow were falling there, flakes shaping snow eyes, hair. A face trembled like a white, beautiful moth, smiled. She beckoned to him, shining in silver, and he knew he must go. Unafraid, not hesitating, he paused only at the garden's edge, where as though he'd forgotten something, he stopped and looked back at the bloomless, descending blue, at the boy he had left behind.
The theme of the novel stood out from the preoccupation of other writers of the time, who were focusing on the future of America, or on the Second World War, like Norman Mailer in The Naked and the Dead, which was published the same year. The accomplished style, rich imagery, and symbolism enraptured readers, and success was his. To some extent, success was also due to the controversy arising from the photo on the back of the book, a sensual, provocative pose chosen by the author himself. This 23-year-old would later become the most photographed writer of his generation. His career was launched like a lipstick or a brand of baby powder, according to one snide remark. Basking in his success, Capote left for Europe, visiting London, Paris, and Venice. His reputation had preceded him, and he was invited to the most fashionable places where he could mingle with the rich and famous. He returned to New York aboard the Queen Mary in the company of Tennessee Williams, who said of the Capote he got to know during the voyage, "At that time, you couldn't have wished for better company than Truman. He hadn't become caustic yet, at least not wickedly so. Instead, he was full of imagination and mischief." Capote was soon to leave again, this time for Sicily, with his new lover, Jack Dunphy. On the way, he stopped off in Tangiers, accompanied by Jane and Paul Bowles. As a result of this voyage, he published a collection of travel writings entitled Local Color. At this point in his life, Capote had become a feature of the New York jet set. But he still remained bound to his childhood and to the South. Grass Harp was published in 1951 and was based on his life in Monroeville. The demons of other voices, other rooms, however, had disappeared and had been replaced with a dreamy pastoral setting.
If on leaving town you take the church road, you soon will pass a glaring hill of bone-white slabs and brown burnt flowers. This is the Baptist cemetery. Below the hill grows a field of high Indian grass that changes color with the seasons. Go to see it in the fall, late September, when it's gone red at sunset, when scarlet shadows blow firelight breeze over it and the autumn winds strum in its dry leaves, sighing human music, a harp of voices. It must have been on one of those September days when we were there in the woods gathering roots that Dolly said, "Do you hear? That is the grass harp, always telling a story. It knows the stories of all the people on the hill, of all the people who ever lived. And when we're dead, it will tell ours too."
After Grass Harp, Capote decided to rid himself once and for all of the demons of the past. He felt he needed to find a new mode of expression and so turned to the theater and cinema. First, he adapted Grass Harp for Broadway, but it flopped. Then he co-wrote the screenplay for John Huston's film Beat the Devil, starring Humphrey Bogart, but these proved merely to be amusing digressions. As he was zigzagging between different types of writing, the adoptive New Yorker carried on his flamboyant lifestyle. As court jester to the jet set, he danced with the stars, sat at tables with the rich, appeared in all the fashionable places, and constantly featured in the gossip columns. To society women, he was darling or sweetheart, and full of self-belief, he was always ready to amuse with some biting quip. He described, for example, the marriage of Arthur Miller to Marilyn Monroe as the death of a playwright. It was as an observer of the fashionable society of which he'd become a part that he managed to make his next mark. His delightful thumbnail sketches of the people he encountered brought him renown as a caustic, sometimes scathing portraitist. In 1958, Capote published Breakfast at Tiffany's. This short novel captured the spirit of the moment perfectly in its main character, Holly Golightly. She was an impenetrable young woman who was at the same time manipulative and honest, fragile and strong, who resembled both the young women Capote was regularly meeting and his mother, such as he had imagined her in his childhood. Coming from a backwaters town, Holly had long dreamt of having breakfast at Tiffany's, the ultimate in New York fashion.
I knew damn well I'd never be a movie star. It's too hard. And if you're intelligent, it's too embarrassing. My complexes aren't inferior enough. Being a movie star and having a big fat ego are supposed to go hand in hand. Actually, it's essential not to have any ego at all. I don't mean I'd mind being rich and famous. That's very much on my schedule, and someday I'll get around to it. But if it happens, I'd like to have my ego tagging along. I want to still be me when I wake up one fine morning and have breakfast at Tiffany's.
Once again, there was an enthusiastic reaction. Norman Mailer, his contemporary and main rival, paid the book this now famous homage. Truman Capote is the most perfect writer of my generation. He writes, word for word, the most well-balanced rhythmical sentences. I wouldn't change one syllable of Breakfast at Tiffany's. It'll become one of the all-time greats. A little later, Capote accepted a job from The New Yorker to follow the Black American cast of Porgy and Bess to Moscow. He had a flash of inspiration which led him to send back his report in the style of a fiction. It was here that he had the beginnings of an idea for a faction that he was later to call the non-novel novel.
I wanted to produce a journalistic novel, something on a large scale that would have the credibility of film, the depth and freedom of prose, and the precision of poetry.
His chance to put his faction idea into practice came on November 15, 1959, when he read in the New York Times the headline of a story from Holcomb, Kansas, which ran, "Rich Farmer and 3 Family Murdered." Capote went to Holcomb immediately. He knew very little of the murders or of the victims themselves, the Clutter family. Even the police had no murder suspects. Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, the eventual murderers, were still unknown. All he had was a title, In Cold Blood. Once again, he was throwing caution to the wind.
Yes, it was like playing high-stakes poker. For 6 nerve-shattering years, I didn't know whether I had a book or not. Those were long summers and freezing winters, but I just kept on dealing the cards, playing my hand as best I could, and then it turned out that I did have a book.
At first, he decided to stay detached. But after spending hours with the protagonists, making thousands of pages of notes, he became more and more personally involved. He was in the process of turning what was just a sad piece of news into a major national tragedy. The epic proportions of his work can be felt as early as the opening lines as he sets the scene.
The village of Holcomb stands on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. Some 70 miles east of the Colorado border, the countryside with its hard blue skies and desert-clear air has an atmosphere that is rather more far western than Middle West. The local accent is barbed with a prairie twang, a ranch hand nasalness, and many of the men wear frontier trousers, Stetsons, and high-heeled boots with pointed toes. The land is flat and the views are awesomely extensive. Horses, herds of cattle, a white cluster of grain elevators rising gracefully as Greek temples are visible long before the traveler reaches them.
He constructs the book like a detective story, first establishing the setting, then building the tension with descriptions of the last day of each Clutter family member, then finally leaving them to their bloody encounter with their murderers. But In Cold Blood is not just a minutely detailed account of a bloody crime. It is also the story of a simple, orderly, hard-working family which suddenly comes face to face with unspeakable horror. The horror committed by 2 murderers who reveal the dark side of America. Its repressed violence, its continuing struggle between the good guys and the bad guys. The climax comes with the discovery of the crimes and the subsequent fear and terror which stalk the streets of the little town.
Holcomb's widowed postmistress, the intrepid Mrs. Myrtle Clare, scorned her fellow townsmen as a lily-livered lot shaking in their boots, afraid to shut their eyes, and said to herself, "This old girl, she's sleeping as good as ever. Anyone wants to play a trick on me, let him try." As usual, Mrs. Clare's notions conformed with those of very few. Around here, according to the proprietor of one Garden City hardware store, locks and bolts are the fastest-going item. Folks ain't particular about what brand they buy, they just want them to hold. Imagination, of course, can open any door, turn the key, and let terror walk right in. Another reason, the simplest, the ugliest, was that this hitherto peaceful congregation of neighbors and old friends had suddenly to endure the unique experience of distrusting each other. Understandably, they believed that the murderer was amongst themselves, and to the last man endorsed an opinion advanced by Arthur Clutter, a brother of the deceased, who, while talking to journalists in the lobby of a Garden City hotel on November 17th, had said, "When this is cleared up, I'll wager whoever did it was someone within 10 miles of where we now stand."
The turning point for the author and the book was the arrest of the two suspects, Dick Hickok and Perry Smith. It was only then that Capote started to understand the huge proportions of his work and how deeply involved he had become. When he met Perry Smith for the first time, he saw a man as small as he, who had been abandoned as a child and sent to stay in a foster home. Smith's past was in fact uncannily like Capote's own. From then on, Capote's involvement became total. He began to spend a great deal of time with the two prisoners during the excruciating wait for their execution, which was continually being postponed due to procedure.
It seemed to Perry as though he existed deep underwater. Perhaps because the row usually was as gray and quiet as ocean depths, soundless except for snores, coughs, the whisper of slippered feet, the feathery racket of the pigeons nesting in the prison walls. But not always. Sometimes, Dick wrote in a letter to his mother, you can't hear yourself think. They throw men in the cells downstairs, what they call the hole, and plenty of them are fighting mad and crazy to boot. Curse and scream the whole time. It's intolerable, so everybody starts yelling to shut up. I wish you'd send me earplugs. Only they wouldn't allow me to have them. No rest for the wicked, I guess.
On April 14, 1965, an emotionally exhausted Truman Capote attended the hanging of Dick Hickok and Perry Smith. These two men had come to think of him as their friend, and yet this friend needed their execution to complete his book. Capote never fully recovered from this traumatic episode, and it would prove to be the first terrible step in a long process of self-destruction which continued right up to his death some 20 years later.
Oh boy.
But for the time being, he could bask in the glory of his success and enjoy the year 1966, the pinnacle of his career. Coming in the middle of a decade which opened with the death of John F. Kennedy and concluded with the murder of Sharon Tate, the reverberations of this crime deep in the heart of the Midwest were felt throughout America.
We'll come back with Truman Capote. We'll get this all straightened out.
In Cold Blood first appeared in 1965 in 4 episodes in The New Yorker, and its publication brought the weekly record sales. The release of the book in January 1966 also generated unprecedented media interest. Capote made the cover of all the magazines. The New York Times Book Review dedicated to him the longest interview it had ever done. Life consecrated 18 pages to him. With constant appearances on radio and television, he told the story of the 6-year ordeal so many times that his biographer would later claim that it had become as much a part of American folklore as George Washington's cutting down of the cherry tree.
Yes.
The amount of money earned by the book also made the headlines. $2 million ran the New York Times, which calculated a sum of $14 per word in royalties.
Truman, was it hard to get to know Dick and Perry?
Dick is very easy to get along with and easy to know because he was like somebody you would meet on a train who would just start up an instant conversation and want to tell you everything that ever happened to him. But Perry was a strange and difficult boy. But for the two, I certainly got, in the end, what I consider closer to him because he was so difficult to get close to. But we became very, very close to and very intimate sort of, an intense sort of friendship. I don't know if friendship's exactly the word, but some kind of very intense relationship having to do with his total loneliness and my sort of feelings of pity for him and even a kind of affection. And
Over the following months, Capote was constantly sought after. He was invited onto the lecture circuit, questioned as an expert on criminology, asked for his opinions on the death penalty and judiciary reform. The press, though, was really interested in the preparations for his black and white ball and the 500 intimate guests who would come to hail the triumph of America's most successful writer. A lifelong dream, as it was put by one close friend. I think it was something of a lifelong dream for the kid from New Orleans. He wanted to throw the biggest, most fantastic party the world had ever seen. He wanted to see the richest, the most famous from every possible field fighting over the right to attend a party given by a strange little man, himself.
There was just 3 or 4 hours.
Over the next few years, as the fuss died down, the ordeal of writing In Cold Blood and the unforgettable vision of Hickok and Smith's executions started to take their toll on Capote. The demons he had spent a lifetime trying to repress resurfaced to haunt him.
The experience served to heighten my feeling of the tragic view of life, which I've always held, and which accounts for the side of me that appears extremely frivolous. That part of me is always standing in a darkened hallway, mocking tragedy and death. That's why I love champagne and stay at the Ritz.
Capote tried desperately to recreate his role as court jester to the jet set, but his heart was no longer in it. His view of the world had changed. His quick, caustic mind was full of spite and rancor. His quips had become malicious. Increasingly, he found solace in alcohol, drugs, sleeping pills, and antidepressants. He came up against more and more difficulties, the most obvious being a lack of inspiration. Whenever asked about his plans, he would only refer to what he called his great opus. He had been working on it for years, collecting material from friends, making endless notes in order to create a vast tableau of the America of the rich and powerful. The latter-day equivalent, he claimed, of Proust's masterpiece, Remembrance of Things Past. The title had long since been decided, Answered Prayers, taken from the quotation by Teresa of Avila, "More tears have been shed over answered prayers than over those that have gone unanswered."
Welcome, if you will, one of the most celebrated and colorful authors of our era, Truman Capote. Truman? Do your social activities keep you from writing, Truman?
I've been being very quiet, actually, the last 7 or 8 months because I've been writing about 6-7 hours a day, which is a lot.
Answered prayers? That's a long time.
We're near the end now.
I've been interviewing you on that book for 10 years. Is that going to...
Well, it takes that long. I've been working on it longer than that.
Is the publisher screaming, "Where's my book"?
The continual pushing back of deadlines for answered prayers caused problems for Capote. And Esquire, fed up with waiting, eventually published passages of the book in 1975 and 1976. The extent of his failure was equal to the enormity of his previous successes. Literary interest was overshadowed by the scandal created by these few pages. Here was Capote attacking his friends, digging up old gossip, hitting below the belt with a ferocity that was almost suicidal, the final proof of his desire to self-destruct. Outcast from the jet set, rejected by his closest friends, Capote nevertheless tried to face up to his new enemies. He wrote more in the press and appeared on television, though often under the influence of drink or drugs. Often he played devil's advocate and was most often derisory.
I'm not a saint yet. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm homosexual. I'm a genius.
Just as America was attempting to come to terms with the Vietnam War and the assassination of Martin Luther King, Capote surrounded himself in rancor and spite. From this long period of physical and social suicide, however, he did manage to produce one or two gems which recall his once unparalleled talent. His short stories and portraits, for example, grouped together in 1980 under the title Music for Chameleons, for which he himself wrote the preface which ends,
I'm here alone in my dark madness, all by myself, with my deck of cards.
On August 25, 1984, in California, a month before his 60th birthday, Truman Capote passed away.